Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 9 articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express, especially from the perspective of the upcoming mains exam. In the first article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the role of parliamentary committees and the issues in the functioning of them. In the next article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the different aspects of National Education Policy 2020. In the next article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the India's public health sector and the issues plaguing the sector. In the next article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the design-linked incentive scheme of the semiconductor sector in India. In the fifth article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the concept of enemy properties in India. Finally, in the Prelims Snippet section, we'll have a discussion with respect to some of the very important topics for the preliminary exam. Now, coming to the very first article, it is about the role of parliamentary committees. So what we have recently seen is that departmentally related standing committees of the parliament, they are likely to be finalized soon. Now, this gives us the opportunity to talk about the importance of parliamentary committees and the issues they are plaguing with and what should be the way forward. Now, this is with respect to GS2, Indian Constitution, features and parliament structure and functioning. Now, before we talk about the parliamentary committees, let us first have a discussion with respect to the parliament. Now, we all know that the Parliament of India is the supreme law-making institutions, right? And this particular institution is entrusted with a lot of tasks. Let's say framing of the statutory laws, or bringing amendments to the constitution, or deliberating on some of the very important national issues, or passing resolutions. Thus, what we see is that the parliament is entrusted with a lot of powers and prestige. But again, what has to be kept in mind is that all these things make the functioning of the parliament very varied, very complex, and very voluminous, right? It is because of this that the parliament is actually assisted by an instrument of the parliament functioning, and that is the instrument of parliamentary committees, right? Now, if you go into the definition of the parliamentary committees, how you can define is that these are the committees of the members of parliament who are either elected or appointed by the house or are nominated by the chair of the house, that is by the speaker in the case of Lok Sabha or by the chairman in the case of Rajya Sabha. Now, what you need to keep in mind is that these parliamentary committees, they work under the overall supervision and control of the speaker in case of Lok Sabha and the chairman in case of Rajya Sabha, right? Again, the origin of these parliamentary committees goes back to the British Parliament, right? Now, what you need to keep in mind is that we have got two very important constitutional articles. The very first article is Article 105. Now, this Article 105 talks about the powers and privileges of the House, of its members, and of its committees. Then we have got Article 118, which actually gives the power to the Parliament to frame its rules. That is the rules of the procedure and the conduct of the business. On the basis of these two articles, what we have is the functioning of the parliamentary committees. Now, again, the Constitution of India does make some mention of these committees at different places. However, it does not specify the composition or the tenure or the functions of these respective committees. Now, if you go into the classification of the parliamentary committees, they can be primarily classified into two ways. First is the standing committee and the second is ad hoc committee. Now, just look at this. See, if we talk about the word standing committees, the word standing committee itself means that it is of permanent nature, right? So they are constituted permanently, that is for a specific time period, annually, let's say, and they are given a specific task to do. Then we have got the ad hoc committee. Now, these are something which are not permanent in nature. They are temporary in nature. They are actually constituted for a specific period, for a specific task, right? Now, if you go into the standing committees, if we have a discussion on these standing committees, the first can be the financial standing committees. Now, in the financial standing committees, the first is the Public Accounts Committee, a very important committee. See, Public Accounts Committee consists of 22 members. Right? And this is very important. It can be very important for your prelims, right? So please pay attention. So the Public Accounts Committee consists of 22 members. Out of these 22 members, 15 are elected from the Lok Sabha and 7 are elected from the Rajya Sabha. Now, how they are elected? They are elected indirectly through the method of proportional representation by means of single transferable vote. Now, one thing you must keep in mind that we have the chairman. We have got the chairman of Public Accounts Committee who by convention is from the opposition. So just remember that, by convention. Again, what is the function or what are the tasks which are given to this committee? See, this committee, Public Accounts Committee, it basically examines or studies the appropriation or financial accounts of the union and also the reports made by the Comptroller and Auditor General on these accounts, right? So that is what the function is. Next is the Estimates Committee. Now, the Estimates Committee, it consists of 30 members. One thing what you need to keep in mind is that the 30 members, all 30 members are actually elected from the Lok Sabha itself, right? And they are elected through the means of proportional representation by means of single transferable vote, that is indirectly. Now, the chairman of the estimates committee, he is invariably from the ruling party. What is the task of this committee? Now, the task of this estimates committee is look into the estimates, the budgetary estimates, and suggest economies to the public expenditure. Next is we have got the Public Undertakings Committee. Again, the Public Undertakings Committee, it consists of 22 members. That is, 15 are elected from the Lok Sabha and 7 are elected from the Raj Sabha. Again, the method is proportional representation by means of single transferable vote, right? And what is the task of this committee? The task of this committee is to basically look into the reports of the public sector undertakings and also the report by the CAG on these undertakings, right? So these are the Financial Standing Committee. Then we have got the Departmentally Related Standing Committee. See, please understand that at the union level, we have got a lot of ministries and departments. So what these Departmentally Related Standing Committee do is that there are in total 24 Departmentally Related Standing Committees. And these 24 DRSCs, they actually cover all the jurisdiction of different departments and ministries of the union, right? Now, their task, the primary task of DRSCs is to hold the executive accountable, right? Now, let's say you have got Ministry of Home Affairs, you have got the Ministry of Consumer Affairs. So, for all these ministries, you have respective DRSCs, right? Which look into the matters, different matters. Again, these DRSCs, they consist of each DRSC. Every DRSC, it consists of 31 members. 21 are actually nominated by the Speaker in the Lok Sabha, and 10 members of a particular DRSC, they are nominated by the Chairman of the Raj Sabha, right? Now, again, as I said, that there are 24 DRSCs which cover different ministries. These 24 DRSCs, now you can divide these DRSCs into two parts, that is 16 and 8. So 16 work under the overall supervision of the Lok Sabha and 8 work under the overall supervision of the Raj Sabha. This is a basic structure. Then we have got other types of standing committees. Let's say the Committee on Government Assurance. Let's say the Committee on Empowerment of Women. Let's say the Committee of Privileges, right? Ethics Committee, different committees. Then we talk about the ad hoc committees. See, as I said, that they are constituted for a specific purpose, right? And they work on that purpose, and once the purpose is achieved, they are then disbanded. Now, the ad hoc committee, they are primarily of two types. First is Enquiry Committee. Now, what is the word? As the word itself says, Enquiry Committee. So, their task is to inquire upon a particular issue, which the House has asked them to do, right? Once the inquiry gets completed, then they get disbanded. Next, the second type of committee is that of Advisory Committee. As the name said, advisory. So it particularly, the mandate of the committee is to advise on a particular issue, right? So they are constituted. Let's say just before a few days, we had a discussion on parliamentary committees where we actually discussed that, for the WAF amendment bill, you had a particular joint committee of the parliament. So the task of the committee is to basically study what the government is actually planning to do with respect to a particular bill and then suggest the reform measures, right? Now, this advisory committee, it can consist of joint committee, that is members from both the houses, or it can have select committee, that is members from individual house. That is a basic outlay of the parliamentary committees, right? Now, what are the powers and functions of parliamentary committee? First, as I said, that it reviews and scrutinizes the working of the government. See, we have a parliamentary form of government, right? And in the parliamentary form of government, the executive is accountable to the parliament, right? So these parliamentary committees, as an instrument of the parliament, make sure that the government works under the overall framework of the constitutional principles, under the overall framework of the statutory laws, right? Next is, it has the power to summon ministers and officials. See, once the committee is having a discussion on a particular issue, if it's having a deliberation on a particular aspect, it can call ministers or different officials and testify their sort of arguments, right? And then it can also seek more questions, right? Next is examination of bills. Very important part. Now, this is where the importance of these parliamentary committee lies, that it basically looks into the different bills which are proposed by the government. It sees whether they are in the line of the constitutional mandate, whether they are basically under the framework of the constitutional principles, right? So that is what the work of the committee is all about. Next, it makes recommendation, obviously. So whenever a committee finds that something needs to be added, right? See, these committees make sure that if you have a particular bill, that should basically fulfill the mandate of that particular bill, right? In different domains. That is, it has the powers to make recommendation and to make sure that the bill is comprehensive in nature, it's holistic in nature. Now, what is the significance of these parliamentary committees? The very first is expertise and specialization. See, Please understand that normally the member of the parliaments, they are of journalist in nature, right? They don't possess that specific sort of domain expertise. But you have got some members who have had a lot of experience in a particular domain, right? So these members, once the committees are constituted, these members provide the domain expertise, right? On the basis of their experience, on the basis of their learning. Let's say we have got specific departments. Let's say we have got foreign affairs, or let's say we have got finance. Let's say we have got defense, or let's say we have got science and technology, right? Now, in such sort of parliamentary committees which deal with these ministries, what is needed is that you have got persons who are expert in these fields. Let's take the case of foreign affairs. So we have one of the very honorable members of parliament, that is Shashi Tharoor. Now, he has had a lot of experience when we talk about the international relations. So therefore, the presence of Shashi Tharoor in a particular parliamentary committee would be sort of an advantage in the terms of giving more value-added inputs, right? Next is cross-party collaboration. As I just said, that the members of this committee, as we talked about the financial committee, of public accounts committee, or public undertaking committee. Now, the members are from different parties. It makes sure that there is proper collaboration. Decisions are made on consensus, right? So different members from different political parties, they can come and they can deliberate and then they can reach to a consensus. Next is they act as mini parliament. Again, what you need to keep in mind is, as we started in the beginning, that parliament has a lot of tasks to do. Now, if these tasks of research on a particular bill, making adequate suggestions, prompt suggestions, making sure that we have got very specific suggestions to a particular bill. Now, if they can be delegated to these committees, the parliament can focus more upon the deliberative aspect. See, please understand that the most important work of the parliament is to have debates and discussions, right? So if these tasks are delegated to these parliamentary committees, there is a task to do research, to make sure to examine different bills, then the parliament is in a better position to focus more upon the important tasks. For example, deliberation. Next is the checks and balance. What do I mean by that? See, checks and balances, as I said, the parliamentary form of government is where you have the executive who holds accountability to the parliament. Now, in such a scenario, the parliamentary committees are a very good instrument to make sure that the executive is accountable to the parliament. Next is, it provides a robust legal framework. It makes sure that whenever if a government is trying to pass a particular bill, it makes sure that that bill is within the framework of the constitution, within the framework of the different statutory laws. So it tries to make sure the whole legal framework very robust, right, foolproof. Next, financial and budgetary oversight. These committees, let's take the case of financial standing committees. These committees make sure that there is no imprudent expenses. There is no extravagant expenses. It tries to make sure that there is a proper economic principles are followed in the expenditure of the government, right? There are no arbitrary expenses. So that is where it holds very importance when we talk about the budgetary oversight and the financial oversight. Now, what are the issues and challenges with respect to the parliamentary committees? The very first is poor number of sittings. So just look at this chart. See that it actually shows the average annual sittings in different Lok Sabha, right? So we had the first Lok Sabha where the average annual sitting was 135, and we have then the 17th Lok Sabha where the average annual sitting is 55. Please try to understand that there has been a decline in the number of average annual sittings. Now, this directly has no relation with that of parliamentary committees, but it definitely gives a very negative influence to the overall functioning of the parliamentary committees, right? Next is the limited referrals. What we are witnessing is that with time, the number of bills which are being referred to these committees is being reduced. See, primarily it is the executive. It is the work of the executive to make sure that these bills are referred to the committees. But now what we are seeing is there have been allegations that there are limited referrals. Just look at this chart. That in the 14th Lok Sabha, we had almost 60% of the bills which were referred to these committees. Then in the 15th, we had 71%. Then in 16th, the number drastically reduced to 28%. And then in the 17th, it almost reduced to 16%. Now, this is a very small number, right? Next is weekend scrutiny. These parliamentary committees, they don't have the adequate resource, right? They don't have a resource in terms of the research work, in terms of other aspects. So therefore, the overall scrutiny which these parliamentary committees are carrying out, it becomes somewhat weak in nature. Next is resource constraint, as I just talked about. That when you talk about the research staff or the research assistants, or when you talk about the secretariat facilities, or when you talk about even the basic facilities like printer or other things, they have some of these committees, they even don't have that. And therefore, it has an impact on the overall functioning. Next is party politics. Very important. See, as I said, the different parliamentary committees, they have got members from different parties. Now, again, what we are actually witnessing is that party politics is coming into play when we talk about the parliamentary functioning. Ideally, there has to be no party politics in the functioning of the parliamentary committees, but the views of different members of the parliament, they are actually biased. They are not impartial, right? Now, again, the next concern is with respect to the limited powers to enforce. See, please understand that the views or the recommendations are of these committees, they are not binding in nature, right? You cannot force the government to accept these recommendations. Moreover, what we see is that the work of these committee is of post-mortem analysis. That is, they basically work after the action has already been taken, right? So it is of no importance, right? So these are some of the issues which are plaguing the functioning of the parliamentary committees. Now, what should be the way forward to ensure a robust parliamentary committee framework? First is there has to be increase in the referral rate. That is, mandatorily, it has to be made sure that almost all the bills, after they are actually discussed in the parliament, they are passed to the parliamentary committees, so that you can have a more value-added inputs, so that you can have more rational inputs being given by the committees, right? So next is increase resources. So we have got the National Commission to review the working of the Constitution in 2002, which very clearly, categorically said that the resources which are given to the parliamentary committees, they need to be increased. Whether you talk in terms of the research staff, whether you talk in terms of the basic amenities, that has to increase. Third is enhanced transparency. See, the working of these parliamentary committees should not be closed door. What I'm trying to say is that there has to be adequate publication of the reports which are actually being worked upon by these committees, right? There has to be adequate public hearings so that there can be more transparent working of these committees. Next is increase in MPs' participation. See, either you give incentives or you penalize. What I'm trying to say is that either through these two ways, there has to be an increase in the number of member of parliaments presence in these particular parliamentary committees, in different parliamentary committees, so that they can be in a better position to give their views and make sure that we have got a robust legal framework. Next is enhanced independence. Very important. What I'm trying to say is that the views of the members, they should not be based on their party. It should be based on the national interest, right? And that is where we can make sure that we have got proper legal framework. We have got different bills which are in line with the societal evolution, which are actually based on the needs and aspirations of the society, right? So what we see is, please understand that parliamentary committees as a tool of parliament, they hold very much importance, right? They are of prime importance. And therefore, what needs to be there is that there has to be adequate effort from the side of the executive, from the side of the parliamentarians, that we give emphasis on the functioning, on the robust functioning of these parliamentary committees, so that on one hand, it can make sure that the parliament can focus more upon the important issues of national importance. Let's say we have got deliberation on some of the defense and other things. And the second is that it can hold the executive accountable, right? So that is where we can see that parliamentary committees are of prime importance. Also, we had the 28th president of the US who said that Congress in session is Congress on public exhibition, whilst the Congress in committee rooms is Congress at work. Now, this basically statement given by Woodrow Wilson, it specifies, it actually tells us the importance of parliamentary committees, right? So that is the overall construct of parliamentary committees. Now, before we go to the next topic, we have got two previous year's questions. This is from 2013. So I'll read the question for you. It says, consider the following statements. The Parliamentary Committee on Public Accounts consists of not more than 25 members of the Lok Sabha, scrutinizes the appropriation and finance accounts of the government. The third statement is, examines the report of the Comptroller and Auditor General of India. Which of the statements given above is or are correct? 1 only, 2 and 3 only, 3 only, 1, 2 and 3. Do write the answer in the comment section. Now, we have got a previous year's question. Mains question. The question says, explain the structure of parliamentary committee system. How far the financial committees help in the institutionalization of the Indian Parliament? Very important topic. Please do write an answer on this. Now, we also have a practice question. So the practice question says, the parliamentary committees are important institutions to strengthen the principle of parliamentary form of democracy in India. Analyze, right? So do write a question on this. Now, before I go to the next topic, I have got 3 quick questions for you. Now, these questions are intended to assess your preparation. The first question is from polity, right? Now, the question is that we have got zonal councils, right? Statutory bodies. These zonal councils, now you have to tell me who acts as the chairman and the vice chairman of a particular zonal council? That is the first question. So I hope you understood the question. The question says that who acts as a chairman and the vice chairman of a particular zonal council. Second question is with respect to the geography, right? So the question says that there is a particular strait, and this strait joins two water bodies, that is Red Sea and Gulf of Aden. I'm repeating the question. Tell me the strait which joins the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. That is the second question. Third question is from economics, and the question is that which international body publishes the report Global Competitiveness Report? Third question I'm repeating, which international body publishes the report Global Competitiveness Report? Now you really need to give answers to me. Reply your answers as soon as possible, and that would basically, I would then assess your preparation with respect to the UPSC. Now, coming to the next topic, it is about the National Education Policy 2020. So we have our Honorable Vice President who is basically urging different states to adopt the National Education Policy. See, please understand that the government came with this policy with a mandate, with basically a paradigm to transform the overall educational landscape of the country, right? And make sure that it is in line with the aspirations of the 21st century. But what we are seeing is that there are a lot of implementation challenges which this policy has, right? So we'll look into it. Now, this is a part of GS2, social sector education. See, please understand that this national education policy, this basically seeks to tackle the evolving development needs of India. See, we all know that India has a rich demographic dividend. We have a lot of children. And what we are trying to focus upon is trying to maximize their potential through the instrument of education. And this is where the national education policy holds its prime importance. Now, it basically tries to do a comprehensive overhaul of the educational system in the country, starting from the very basic primary education to secondary education to higher education. And it also deals with the management and regulation of the education sector, right? See, one more point which I would like to mention here is that in the 21st century, what we are witnessing is the disruptive technologies. Let's say the artificial intelligence, the machine learning, the Internet of Things. Now, these technologies, they are having the maximum impact on the children. Now, what this policy is trying to do is that it is trying to integrate these technologies into the educational framework so that we can in the best possible manner, we can optimize the outputs of the technology along with the education, right? Now, this particular policy, it actually replaced the National Policy on Education of 1986, which was modified in the year 1992. Now, what are the objectives of the NEP 2020? First is learner-centric teaching. That is, at the very center lies the learner. That is, the importance of learner is being emphasized through this policy. Second is discussion-based teaching. That is, the focus is upon the deliberative aspect. That is, the focus is upon having discussions in the class so that there can be more productive outcomes. Next is delivering value-based education. Now, this becomes very important. See, we all know that we also have GS Paper 4, Ethics. Now, through this paper, GS Paper 4, we are basically trying to give the importance of ethics, the values. Similarly, the National Education Policy is trying to rekindle the spirit of values in the education system, not just the theoretical learning. Next is developing multidisciplinary thinkers. See, please understand that as of now, in the 21st century, we are actually dealing with interdisciplinary aspects. This you have also seen in your prelims questions, or in fact in mains questions as well, that we have got topics which are interdisciplinary in nature from different subjects, right? And that is where this policy is trying to give importance. That is, trying to give that frame of mind, trying to give the impetus on developing those critical abilities with respect to interdisciplinary topics. Next is developing creativity, so that there can be adequate innovation, and that innovation can lead to the betterment of society. Next is developing discovery-oriented teaching. That is, adequate emphasis is being given on the research so that it can give us productive outcomes, and that can ultimately lead to the betterment of society. Next is developing critical thinkers. The objective is to develop the cognitive abilities, to make sure that there is adequate emphasis on the rationality, on the rational principles, and over there what is needed is critical thinkers. Next is developing decision making based on rational outlook, decision making based on logical inputs, right? And that is how we can make sure that we have got an informed decision making. Now, if we talk about the salient features of the national education policy. The very first is universal access. That is, it is trying to make sure that there is universal access with respect to the primary and secondary education in particular, right? Next is shift to a 5+3+3+4 system. That is, from the conventional 10+2 system, it is trying to focus upon the 5+3+3+4 system in order to make the education more holistic, in order to compartmentalize in such a way that it is based on the needs of the children. Next is multilingualism. See, it is trying to focus upon making sure that adequate importance is given to the linguistic backgrounds of the children. That is, one language, it should not be that one language is imposed on these children. So it is trying to focus upon a sort of a flower, a bouquet of languages. Next is inclusive education. It is trying to focus upon those children, specifically on those children who belong to the socially and educationally disadvantaged sections, right? So it is trying to give more importance in the sort of educational attainment of these people, right? Next, the gross enrollment ratio enhancement. It is trying to make sure that there is almost universal gross enrollment ratio when we talk about the primary and the secondary education, and almost 50% GER by the year 2035 when we talk about the higher education in the country. Next is the focus is on the research in the form of establishing the National Research Foundation. So it is basically trying to say that adequate funds would be disbursed to different institutes so that they can specifically focus upon the research output. Next is the language preservation. Very important. See, in India, we have got some of the language which are actually going to the path of extinction, right? So it is making sure that adequate emphasis is placed on making sure that these languages are actually kept safe. Adequate importance is being given to the reinvigoration of the learning of these languages, right? Next is internationalization. The focus of NEP is to make sure that there is a sort of robust global collaboration in the education domain. That is, different education of eminence in India, or let's say some of the very good educational institutions around the world, they collaborate and then they reach to, and they basically give us more productive outcomes, right? Next is enhanced funding. So the government is trying to focus upon making sure that there is adequate funding through the PPP modes, making sure that there are various avenues through the issuance of bonds or through the different international organizations. Next is that the focus is on, as I said, the Parakh Assessment Center. So this particular assessment center, it is trying to have a more holistic assessment approach, right? So it stands for performance analysis, review and assessment, holistic assessment system, right? So it is basically trying to make sure that the assessment process is holistic in nature. Next is technology integration. As I said, in the 21st century, we are dealing with a lot of technology. So it is trying to emphasize the importance of the integration of technology so that we can make the education more inclusive in nature, right? Next is gender inclusion fund. It is trying to also focus upon this aspect of making the education more gender inclusive, making sure that we have got the women, we have got the girls who are also made the part of the education, and then we have got the people from the LGBTQ community who are basically streamlined in the education system. Next is the special education zones. There, it's a concept which basically talks about the fact that there are some locations in the country, some regions which are educationally backward. So this education policy, it is trying to focus more upon those areas so that adequate emphasis can be placed, adequate resources can be disbursed, and then the educational attainment in these areas can be enhanced, right? Now, what are the prospects if we basically follow the national education policy and if it basically fructifies? What are the prospects? First, as I said, that it is basically talking about the holistic development. That is, it is going beyond the rote learning. It is trying to focus more upon the critical aspects. It is trying to focus more upon developing the interdisciplinary linkages. It is trying to focus more upon developing the cognitive abilities through the logic, through rationality, right? And also, it is trying to deal with the complexities of the 21st century. As I said, different technology. So it is trying to deal with the technology disruption, right? Next is improved equity and inclusion. See, we have got this system of 5+3+3+4. Now, it basically tries to focus upon the early childhood care and education. So, conventionally, we had the focus only upon the educational aspect. But now, through this policy, we are focusing more upon the health aspect also, right? Overall well-being of the children through the early child education and care. Next is that there is focus upon the mother tongue instruction. As I said, that focus is more upon making sure that children basically learn in their own mother tongue, right? They are not, other some sort of languages, they are not imposed. And after they basically develop that level, that minimum level of cognitive abilities, then they can be asked to learn some different other languages, right? Next, it seeks to expand the RT, right to education mandate. See, the RT, it basically focuses upon the education of the children from 6 to 14 years of age. But through this particular national policy, national education policy, we are making sure that this mandate or the overall coverage of the right to education, it basically increases, so as to incorporate people from older sections, right? Next, the focus upon is the skill development and employability. See, this is very important. Right now, the focus of this policy is to make sure that skill development is paid adequate attention, so that we just don't merely focus upon the theoretical aspect, so that we make our learning more vocational in nature. So adequate emphasis is being focused upon the vocation, so that the children can develop those capacities, those skills that can make them more employable, right? Now also, according to the World Bank data, what it says is that as per educational resources which are being provided to the children, or only 25% would be able to sort of have those skills which are needed for in the future, right? So what we see is that almost 75% of the children, they won't be in a capacity to deal with those technologies of the future, right? So adequate emphasis has to be given on different skill acquisition, and also on making sure that technologies, various technologies, are integrated into the education paradigm. Now this policy is focusing upon empowering teachers so that they can basically focus upon the needs and aspirations of the children and make sure that there is a proper discussion based learning. It's not like a monologue, right? And also this particular policy is focusing upon a 4-year integrated B.Ed program, Bachelor of Education program. Now, what are the challenges with respect to the realization of the policy objectives? The very first is implementational hurdles. See, please understand that India is a developing country and we have got different social priorities. So there are obviously funding constraints. It aims to enhance the percentage of the GDP when we talk about to the education, but there are funding constraints, right? And we really cannot depend upon the private sector, because see, if the private sector is increasing its expenses on the education, obviously it would increase the cost of the education, and then it would lead to the marginalization of the children, right? Next, there has to be strong political will. It's not just about the union government. See, ultimately, we have got the state government and the local authorities who are basically managing the education. So they have to be politically very strong. They have to bring in reform measures. Next is collaboration. Effective collaboration is needed from different aspects. We have got different departments. We have got the union government. We have got the state government. We have the local government. We have got the private sector. So adequate collaboration has to be there. Next is, it has been alleged that there has been a focus more upon the privatization of the education. See, as I just said, that if the privatization is increasing, so that would obviously make the education more costly, and that would lead to sidelining of these students, marginalization of these students, especially from the vulnerable sections. Next, there is also the allegation of centralization of power. See, we have got the National Council for Teacher Education, or we have got the National Research Foundation. Now, all these important bodies, they are basically under the overall ambit of the central government. So what the critics are saying is that why don't you basically devolve these functions to the state governments? Next is digital divide. The technology is basing its resources and the learning outcome of the children more so on the technology, and what we see is that there is a very deep digital divide when we talk about the rural or the urban areas, or between the different classes of people, the rich or the poor. So adequate emphasis has to be there on the digital education of the people. Next is teacher training and recruitment. See, we have got the National Council of Teacher Education. So the policy says that adequate emphasis has to be given first on the teacher training, because once the teacher are trained properly, then you can ensure that there is proper percolation of those ideas into the children, right? So first, the challenge would be on how to basically make sure that there is adequate emphasis, adequate and proper robust training of the teachers. Next is shifting mindsets from a rote learning focus system. See, as of now, what we are actually seeing is that still the Indian education system is based on rote learning. So shifting from the rote learning to a sort of critical thinking sort of mode, where the focus is more on the rationality, where the focus is more upon the logical reasoning, that would take time. And see, this has been entrenched into the minds of the people, especially when we talk about the community. We have got parents, right? We have got our parents who also still focus upon this aspect of rote learning. So that has to be done with. Now, what should be the way forward? See, again, there has to be a phased implementation of this policy. It should not be like you just form a policy and try to implement it on the other day. It cannot happen. There have to be defined timelines. There have to be defined targets. And once you basically achieve those targets, then you can scale to the next level, right? So next, what we can also focus upon is the collaborative efforts. As I said, we have got the private sector, we have got the state governments, we have got the local authority, we have got the central government, different departments. There needs to be adequate collaboration among all these organs. Next is decentralized planning. See, once you are making a policy, you have to make sure that different inputs are received from different stakeholders. And over here, what you see is that there has to be importance given to the decentralized planning so that adequate views can be incorporated from different stakeholders, right? Next is public-private partnerships. This is important. So, see, we are not talking about that the government should only take the responsibility or just private sector should take the responsibility. There can be a collaborative mechanism where both the government and the private sector can come on board, decide that how affordable education we can make sure that the education is more affordable and more equitable, and then come out with different plans, right? So there has to be adequate emphasis on public-private partnerships. Next is community engagement to ensure the wider ownership and support. As I said, that the mindset of the people has to change. It has to change from this rote learning to a critical thinking sort of a way where we focus more upon the cognitive development, where we focus more upon the logic, right? So that has to be, this mindset has to be done away with, and adequate change has to be brought in from the grassroots level, right? So that is where the way forward has to be. Again, the national education policy is definitely a transformative step, and it is definitely trying to bring a change, a very positive outcome in the overall educational landscape of the country. But what remains to be seen is how to basically tackle these challenges, and these way forward, these measures can be incorporated in order to make sure that we have got a more inclusive, we have got a more equitable educational paradigm in place. Now, before we go to the next topic, we have a mains practice question. So the question says, the National Education Policy 2020 aims to significantly transform the education paradigm in the country. However, the implementation of the policy suffers from various challenges. Discuss. So do write a particular answer on this question. Now, the next topic is about the India's public health sector. Now, we have a particular column in the Hindu, and this particular writer is talking about the weak health, that is a public health structure in India, right? Now, he also says that the recent union budget has been critiqued for its inadequate focus upon the social sector, specifically the public health sector. Now, this becomes important for us to analyze that what the structure of the public health care system in India is, what are the inadequacies, and what should be the way forward. Now, this is a part of GS2 welfare schemes for vulnerable sections, development, management, or social sector relating to health. Now, if you talk about the public healthcare system in India, it can be studied in the form of a pyramid, right? So if you just look at this picture, we have at the very base level, at the very primary, at the grassroots level, we have got the sub-health centers, right? So these sub-health centers, they basically cater to the population of around 3,000 to 5,000 population, right? At the next level, what we have is the primary health centers, which covers a population of around 20,000 to 30,000 of population. Now, the next intermediate level is the secondary level. And in the secondary level, we have got the first as the community health centers, which basically cater to the population of 80,000 to 1,20,000. And then the next level is the sub-district hospitals. Then finally, at the top level, we have got the tertiary level. And over here, we have got the district hospitals and the medical college and hospitals. Now, at the tertiary level, they basically try to focus upon the super specialty care, right? The top elite hospitals. Now, this is basically the setup of India's public healthcare system. Now, if you talk about one of the very important terms which is frequently used when we talk about the healthcare apparatus of the country, it is out-of-pocket expenditure. Now, what is this out-of-pocket expenditure? See, the healthcare expenditure which is borne wholly by the individual, that is termed as the out-of-pocket expenditure, and it does not include the sort of social benefits which are given by the government or by the insurance companies, right? So it is basically the expense which is borne wholly by that particular individual. Next, if we talk about the government healthcare expenditure, see, in the year 2021-22, we have got the data by the National Health Accounts. It says that the government spent almost 2.1% of the GDP when we talk about the healthcare. Now, if you break this, we have the union and the state government. So the union government is almost spending 34% of this amount, and then we have got the state's share is of 66%. So over here you can understand that states play a very important role. See, generally when we talk about health, we primarily focus, we think that as if the union government is giving a lot of money and the states are spending. No, states are also spending a lot of money. Almost 2/3 of the money is being spent by the states, right? Now, what is the importance of a robust public healthcare system? If you have a robust public healthcare system, what are its benefits? First is universal health coverage. See, if you have a robust public healthcare system, especially in a country like India, where you have got a lot of poor people, where there's a lot of rural-urban divide, where there's a lot of class distinction, it can lead to a more affordable and quality care, right? And that can ultimately transition to a system which is sort of a universal health coverage, right? So that is one of the importance. Next is disease prevention. If you have a robust public healthcare system, especially at the grassroots level, it can prevent the spread of disease. It can reduce the mortality, right? And then it can also lead to disease prevention, right? So over there, this particular public healthcare systems holds importance. Next is economic development. If you have got a good system in place, public healthcare system in place, it can ensure that the labor productivity is high. It can ensure that people are more well. They are having sort of, there is the prevalence of less disease in the society, and then that will lead to more productive economic outcomes, and it can then further lead to the overall economic growth and development. Next is social justice. See, what we are seeing is it is primarily the poor. It is primarily the poor who bear the most brunt of disease, right? So therefore, adequate public healthcare infrastructure facilities have to be there so that importance can be given to these marginalized sections, to these vulnerable sections, and ensure the social justice in the society. So these are the importance of having a robust public healthcare system in place. Now, what are the issues plaguing the public healthcare system in the country? The very first is funding. See, I definitely agree that there has been an increase in the amount when we talk about the government provisioning of the funds, but still it's very meek. And see, again, we cannot blame all onto the government because, see, as I said in the last article, that India is a developing country. We have got different priorities. We have a humongous population, right? So resources are limited, and then it is basically a sort of an issue of resource crunch. So there is a sort of underfunding when we talk about the central government or the state governments. Also, what we have seen is that there are reports by the Comptroller and Auditor General which have said that there has been a gross mismanagement of funds. There has been siphoning of funds. See, we have got the central government who is providing the funds to the states. States are then given to the district hospitals. But what we are seeing is that in this process, there is sort of gross mismanagement of the funds. And this has been highlighted by the Comptroller and Auditor General. Next is equity in access. See, when we talk about the healthcare access in the country, there is inequity, right? In terms of regional variations. Look at this graph, a very important graph. Now this picture, the map of India, and it is trying to give us information with respect to the gross expenditure on health, gross health expenditure as a percentage of the total health expenditure, and the out-of-pocket expenditure. See, look at this map. What we see is that there are certain states in the country which are having good amount of the money being given by the government, right? So we have got Himachal Pradesh, we have got the hilly states, we have got, in fact, the states like Rajasthan or Gujarat, where substantial amount of money is being given by the government. But we have got states like Uttar Pradesh, or let's say Maharashtra, or let's say West Bengal, where the government is not spending a lot of money, right? So there is regional variation. Next, if we talk about the out-of-pocket expenditure, which is incurred by the individual, what we see is that when we talk about the states like Uttar Pradesh, right? When we talk about the states like Punjab, or when we talk about the state like West Bengal, what we see is that huge amount of money is being borne by the individual, and that is leading to sort of inequitable access to the healthcare, right? So again, what I'm trying to say is that there is a sort of regional variation. Next is private sector dominance. In this article, the author is trying to say that the government is focusing more upon this insurance sort of scenario, providing insurance, health insurance. Now, the government has come up with Prelims Jan Arogya Yojana, right? Insurance facility for the healthcare expenditures. If someone is suffering from a particular disease, then that person can avail the insurance through this particular scheme. Now again, the writer is basically saying that through this scheme, the government is trying to bring in the private sector, and the government is not actually focusing upon increasing the health infrastructure. The government is not focusing upon making sure that there are adequate primary healthcare centers, or primary, or let's say the sub health centers, or let's say the district hospitals. No, the government is not focusing. Now what the writer is talking about, what the writer is saying is that there is a sort of dominance by the private sector through this Prelims Jan Arogya Yojana. Next is inequalities in the healthcare access. Again, when we talk about the rural-urban scenario, when we talk about we have got most of the population which resides in the rural areas, but what we see is that there is sort of inequitable distribution of doctors, healthcare professionals, when we talk about the rural and the urban scene. So there, once if you have a person in the rural areas, it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of time for that person to come to the cities, and it leads to delayed diagnostics, and then it also leads to spread of the disease. Then weakening of the public healthcare infrastructure, as this article is talking about, that the government is not trying to focus upon enhancing the functions or enhancing the number of the public healthcare facilities. Rather, the government is actually trying to focus upon these insurance schemes, right? And thus, it is indirectly giving a boost to the private sector. Next is quality of care. Even when you have got some of these institutions which are providing the public healthcare, what we are seeing is that the care is not adequate. The health facilities are not adequate, right? We have got suboptimal or poor quality of apparatus. We have got poor quality of healthcare professionals, right? So that is one of the issue. Next is healthcare provisions. There is a huge gap when we talk about the doctor-patient ratio. See, the World Health Organization says that there has to be almost 1 doctor per 1,100 population. But what we are seeing is that in India, we have got almost 1 government doctor when we have a population of, when we compare it with the population of 10,000 of people, right? So there is a huge mismatch. Next is skewed distribution. As I said, that most of these doctors who are present, they are actually in the urban areas and they are not in the rural areas. And that leads to lack of services, lack of healthcare services in the rural areas. Next is corruption and inefficiency. As the CAG report highlighted, that there is a sort of lots of cases are there. We even witnessed this during the COVID crisis, where oxygen cylinders or other apparatus, they were being actually mismanaged, and people were actually making huge profits on this illegal sort of businesses, right? Then we have got digital divide. Again, the government is coming up with a lot of technological interventions. Take the case of e-Sanjeevani, right? So we have got the teleconsultation, telemedicine. Take the case of, we have got, in the COVID times, we had the Arogya Setu. So I understand that it is really important for the government to integrate technology in the domain, health domain. But do we really think that, are we sure that all people have good awareness with respect to the digital technologies or digital awareness which are needed in order to handle these technologies? No, that is one issue. Next is rise of non-communicable diseases. See, these health centers at the grassroots, they're focusing upon the communicable diseases. But what we are witnessing is that there has been a slow, and in fact, this is what we call a silent epidemic, right? Silent pandemic also. That there has been an increased prevalence of non-communicable disease. There has been increased prevalence when we talk about diabetes or heart diseases, or when we talk about the diseases with respect to the acute respiratory syndromes, right? So there are issues with respect to non-communicable diseases, and that is not being actually dealt by these public healthcare services. Now, these are the issues which are plaguing the sector. But there have been a lot of government interventions, initiatives. For example, we have got the schemes like Ayushman Bharat, Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, providing insurance, right? Insurance backing, so that if person is having sort of expenses with respect to the health, then a backing can be provided by the government. Next is increased utilization of government facilities. Definitely. See, we have got different state governments who are focusing upon having adequate provisions with respect to the health. Let's say providing the ambulances, providing the medicines, right? Next is Ayushman Arogya Kendras. There are these kendras in some places around the country which are focusing upon sort of subsidized medicines, right? Subsidized therapeutics, subsidized diagnostic facilities, right? Next is Jan Aushadhi Kendras. These kendras basically focus upon providing subsidized generic medicines, right? And then that can help especially the economically weaker section. Next is price regulation of essential medicines. So you must all be aware of this fact that the government publishes a national list of essential medicines in order to regulate the prices of those medicines, right? So the government has been frequently adding medicines to this list so that it can enhance the affordability of these medicines. Next is investments in water supply and sanitation. See, government through the schemes like Swachh Bharat Mission, right, or Jal Jeevan Mission, right? Through the Swachh Bharat Mission, it's trying to focus upon the water sanitation and hygiene by building more sort of toilets and making sure that there is adequate usage of these toilets. And through the Jal Jeevan Mission, it is trying to focus upon providing more sort of functional tap connections so that there can be adequate provisioning of the water, right? So through these schemes, it is also lowering the disease burden. Next is investments in healthcare infrastructure. Again, the government has been focusing upon building a lot of AIMS institutes around the country, making sure that the range of functions being performed by different district hospitals, it is enhancing. So that is where the role of investments in infrastructure comes. Now, what should be the way forward? Now, again, if I can just show you through this graph, that there has been an increasing convergence between the expenditure made by the government and the sort of lowering of out-of-pocket expenditure. Just look at this graph. So we have got in 2018-19, the out-of-pocket expenditure was 40 was 48.2%, right? And then the government healthcare expenditure was 40.6%. Now it has subsequently increased and out of pocket is subsequently decreasing. Now in the year, according to National Health Accounts data, in the year 2022, the out of pocket expenditure, I'm just providing this information for your sort of knowledge, it is 39%, right? So it has further decreased from 48% to 39% according to National Health Accounts data. Now what should be the way forward? See, the way forward has to be increased funding. Right, there has to be a proper roadmap through national health policy where clear goals are made, where proper funding mechanisms are proposed, and through that mechanism we can make sure that there is adequate provisioning of funds with respect to the healthcare. Right, next is universal healthcare coverage. This becomes really important. We have countries like Turkey, we have countries like Thailand who have already reached to this level of universal health coverage because they are focusing upon the grassroots healthcare delivery. They're focusing upon the public healthcare, making the public healthcare more robust. So ultimately, the ultimate goal has to be the universal health coverage. Next is human resource development. See, adequate focus has to be given, and the government is already doing that, on the medical education. Proper skills and education have to be there in the medical domain. And see, again, what we need to focus upon is enhancing the number of doctors, right? See, we have got still a very few less number of colleges, government colleges, which are providing the medical education. So there has to be an increase in the number of these colleges. Next is incentives to retain the healthcare professionals. Very important. See, we have got the medicine graduates, they first complete their MBBS, and see, obviously after completing their MBBS, they get a lot of opportunities, a lot of good opportunities from the urban centers or sometimes from outside the country. So they basically fly to these countries or fly to the urban areas. Now again, what I'm trying to say is that there have to be adequate incentives, financial incentives, so that they can be made to work in the rural healthcare setup, right, for some amount of years, and then they can transition to other areas. But what needs to be kept in mind is that adequate incentives need to be provided. Next is disease prevention and control. Very important. Now, we have already seen the importance of disease prevention and control once we talk about the COVID crisis, right? So adequate emphasis on needs to be placed on having proper infrastructure in place, proper information dissemination systems in place, so that the spread of disease can be tracked and adequate interventions, timely interventions can be made. Next is enhanced disease surveillance mechanism. Very important, as I said. So there has to be surveillance mechanism at the grassroots level, then at the district level, then at the state level, so that the information dissemination can be very robust. Next is promote healthy lifestyle. In order to deal with the non-communicable diseases, there has to be adequate emphasis on making sure that we focus upon, for example, we have got the Eat Right campaign, or for example, we are focusing more upon having a millet-based diet, right? So adequate emphasis has to be placed on promoting healthy lifestyle. Now, this is the overall structure of the healthcare, public healthcare system in India. So what we see is that there are a lot of issues which we have already talked about. There are sort of inequity in access, there are regional variations, right? And there are issues with respect to gross misutilization of fund. But government has taken a lot of initiatives, but there has to be a way forward. So these are the ways which you can basically write in your answers, and the government can actually incorporate in order to make sure that we have a robust public healthcare delivery system. So that is it for this particular article. Now, before we go to the next topic, we have a mains practice question. So the question says, the provisioning of public healthcare in India has significantly improved both qualitatively and quantitatively. However, there are still some serious issues and challenges. In this context, highlight the measures required to make the public healthcare apparatus more strengthened. Do write a particular answer on this question. Now, coming to the next article, it is with respect to the design-linked incentive scheme. So recently, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology has approved the chip design-related proposals from at least 12 Indian startups and has committed more than 130 crore to the projects under this particular design-linked incentive scheme, which is with respect to the semiconductors. Now, this is with respect to the GS3 Science and Technology. Now, what are semiconductors? See, semiconductors are the intermediate between the conductors and the insulators, and they have a wide application in different kinds of electronic devices. For example, integrated chips, or we have got the semiconductor chips, or in fact, in diodes and transistors. So what we see is that they are almost omnipresent, from transportation to electrical power lines to everything, from LEDs to everything. They are of omnipresent nature. They are present everywhere. Therefore, adequate emphasis has to be given to the semiconductor development so that India can also benefit and make sure that it has its own adequate resources in the form of intellectual property, in the form of manufacturing ability with respect to the semiconductors. Now, this particular scheme, design-linked incentive, now this is a part of the overall comprehensive program for the development of semiconductors and display manufacturing ecosystems, which is by the government of India. Now, under this particular scheme, financial incentives and designed infrastructure support is being provided to selected group of players. Let's say we have got the MSMEs, companies, we have got the startups, we have got the domestic companies. So adequate financial incentives is being provided to such entities. Now, these incentives which are actually being provided, they are provided across various stages of development and deployment of semiconductor designs for integrated chips, chipsets, for these semiconductors on chips, for systems and intellectual property cores of these companies, and semiconductor link design. So see, it covers basically different domains of semiconductor development, right? And it is trying to make sure that if you have a particular entity, a particular MSME or a startup who is willing to work upon the design of this semiconductors, so it is, the government is willing to give adequate financial incentives to such companies. Now, the objective, one of the conditions or one of the aspect of this scheme is that these companies are encouraged to retain their domestic status after they have received the claim, and for a period of 3 years. So after they have received the financial sort of incentive by the government, so the government is encouraging to basically retain their status of having a domestic status, right, for the next 3 years. Now, the aim of this particular design link incentive is to nurture at least 20 domestic companies, right? Again, this particular scheme is being carried out by the Center of Development of Advanced Computing, which is a part of the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. Now, this is the nodal agency for the implementation of DLI scheme. Now, if I can just talk about an infographic, so we have got, as I said, it provides the financial support. Then it also has a tenure of 5 years starting from the 1st of January 2022, and the beneficiaries, 100 domestic semiconductor companies. Again, we have got the product link incentives. Now we'll talk about this. So primarily it has 3 components. This particular scheme has 3 components. The first is chip design infrastructure support. Through this, what the government is trying to do is that the CDAC is actually building a India Chip Center, right? So India Chip Center would be a state-of-art facility, and that would provide the technical inputs or facilitate the information dissemination to different players, right? Next is product design linked incentive. Let's say if a particular player has designed a product, right? So, and if the product is into the market, so the government would adequately give the incentive in the form financial incentive in the terms of product design linked incentives. Next is the deployment linked incentives. Let's say you have got a particular MSME or a particular domestic company which has actually worked upon a particular integrated chips, or has worked upon chipsets or the semiconductors or chips or IP cores, intellectual property cores, and it is then being deployed into the market. Then on the basis of that deployment, the government would give incentive, financial incentive to that particular player. So that is the overall structure of this particular scheme. Now this only is to basically make sure that India has a sort of grooming semiconductor paradigm in place, semiconductor space in place, and that is through which this scheme has become really important. So that is what you need to know with respect to this particular scheme. So the next article is with respect to the enemy property. So what we have recently seen is that the Ministry of Home Affairs has put a notification on a parcel of land which basically previously belonged to the family of the former Pakistani president Pervez Musharraf. Now this set of land, this parcel of land is set to be auctioned under the Enemy Property Act, right? So it remains to be seen what enemy property is all about. Now see, India had a lot of wars with Pakistan. So it was the war of 1965 and 71. Also, it had a war with China in 1962. Now, what happened in these wars was that there were a lot of citizens of India, or people from India, who actually migrated to these countries, right? And they left their properties in India. Similarly, you had a lot of people who basically came from Pakistan or China to India. Again, this issue of how to basically manage these properties was dealt by the Defense of India Act of 1962 and the rules which were made under that particular act. So we had the Defense of India rules, and this basically, we had a particular body which was the custodian of enemy property for India, and it became the custodian of all those properties of those people who basically went to these countries from India, right? Now, we had the Tashkent Declaration where there was a proper discussion with respect to the return of the property and assets. But what we saw was that Pakistan actually confiscated all the property of those Indian people who basically came to India after the wars, right? So therefore, it was in the year of 1968 that India basically made a statutory law through the Enemy Property Act of 1968, and basically it gives the power to the custodian of enemy property in India for the continuous vesting of enemy property. Now, this particular act, it basically defines the enemy as a country that committed external aggressions against India, and we have got 2 countries, Pakistan and China. Again, in 2017, we had the Parliament which passed the Enemy Property Amendment and Validation Bill of 2016, which amended the 1968 Act and also the Public Premises Eviction of Unauthorized Occupants Act of 1971. Now this act, it expanded the definition of the terms enemy subject and enemy firm. That is, it included the successes and legal heir of the enemy and also the firms of the enemy, right? So it also included within its ambit the definition, or it changed the definition, and it included the successes and legal hire of the enemy, whether they are sort of citizen of India or not, or whether they are citizen of any country which is enemy or not, right? Therefore, this was a substantial amendment. Next, the amended law provided that enemy property shall continue to vest in the custodian even if the enemy or enemy subject or enemy firm ceases to be an enemy due to death, extinction, winding up of business, or change of nationality, or that legal hire or successor is a citizen of India or a citizen of a country which is not an enemy, right? So this is with respect to a very important topic. It can be important for your prelims. As of now, Uttar Pradesh has the maximum number of enemy properties. We have got around 5,000. Then we have got Bengal, almost 2,735, and then we have got Delhi, which has 487. You can also look at this map. We have got Delhi, we have got UP, which has almost 4,091, and then we have got West Bengal. So that is what you need to know about the enemy properties. Now, coming to the prelims snippet section, we have got the first article as the responsible use of artificial intelligence in the military domain summit. So we have got this particular summit, which is scheduled to start from today, and it would be in Seoul, that is South Korea. Now, please understand that artificial intelligence is actually impacting a lot of domains, right? From education to other social sectors, and also it has a significant impact. It is going to have, and it is having a significant impact on the military domain, right? So how to basically responsibly use the artificial intelligence in this military domain is a very objective of this particular summit. So basically, it's a part of the new global diplomacy to shape the global norms on military applications of the artificial intelligence. The summit is right now being co-hosted by Kenya, the Netherlands, Singapore, and the United Kingdom. We have got stakeholders, we have got the government, we have got the international organizations, we have got technology companies, academia, civil society who are actually coming and having discussions with respect to the responsible use of AI in military domain. Now, the first summit took place last year in The Hague in the Netherlands. Now, it did not lead to any dramatic outcome, but yes, it basically broadened the global debate on the military dimensions of the AI and brought to a wider range of stakeholders into the debate so that there can be an effective debate with respect to the importance and the use and the responsible use of AI in the military domain. So just keep a track of this. It can be important for your prelims. So the next topic is with respect to the presbyopia. Now, this is a particular health condition which results into the gradual loss of eye's ability to focus upon the nearby objects. Now, the symptoms of the presbyopia usually begin at around the age of 40 and worsen till the age of 65. Now, to correct this defect, what we usually do is the doctors put a bifocal lens, which has both a convex lens and a concave lens also. Recently, we have a particular Indian pharmaceutical company which has developed an eye drop to correct this, right? And this is known as Presvu, right? And this has been approved by the Drug Controllers Journal of India, right? So just this particular disease can be asked in the prelims. So see, as I said, that in this condition, what happens is that the lens hardened with the age and unable to change, and the image formation does not take place at the retina, and it takes place behind the retina. But if you have a proper intervention with respect to the lens, what happens is that the image correctly forms on the retina, right? So this is what you need to know with respect to the presbyopia. Now, coming to a very important country which is in the news because of the political instability, we have got the country of Venezuela, South American country. So you can see that it is on the northern part of the South America. So we have got the country of Guyana, which borders this. Then we have got Brazil. Then we have got Colombia, right? So remember this. So that is the basic. And on the northern part, we have got the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. Now, see, there are few places which can be important for your prelims, right? So just remember, we have got the Lake Maracaibo. Now, this is the largest lake in the South America, right? Then we have got a very important river, Orinoco, right? We have got Orinoco River. Now, this is a very important river of South America, especially Venezuela. Then we have got the world's highest fall, that is Angel Falls, which are also present in Venezuela, right? Why this country becomes important is that Venezuela has the largest reserves of oil in the world, right? Crude oil in the world, and it has also a lot of resources when we talk about bauxite or iron ore or other minerals. So that is the reason this country becomes important. They can ask a question in the prelims, right? So the next topic is with respect to the military diplomacy. So what we are recently witnessing is that India is very actively having military engagements, having military exercises with different countries, be it the bilateral exercises or multilateral exercises. For example, we have got the Tarang Shakti, which is basically the Indian Air Force largest multilateral exercise, which is being held in Jodhpur. Now this comprises of 8 countries including India. Then the Malabar naval exercises is set to schedule from the October, right, and it would happen in October, and then it comprises of India, Australia, Japan and US, right, and it would be held in the Visakhapatnam coast. Next, India US also have a bilateral exercise, which is actually bilateral army exercise, which is actually starting from today itself, and that is Yuddh Abhyas, and it is, it's one of the exercises where a lot of American contingents are actually participating with a lot of American ammunitions and artillery, right. Then we have got the Army's 10th edition of the Mitra Shakti, which is a part of the Sri Lanka based military interactions, right, and it was held in August 12 to 25 in Sri Lanka. Then we had the Indian naval ship Shivalik, which basically completed the participation in the exercise Rim of the Pacific, and it was hosted by the US Navy at Guam, which was held from June 27 till August 1. Then we have got the Indian Navy's frontline stealth frigate INS Tabar, which actually participated in the 22nd edition of India-France Varuna exercises off the coast of Mediterranean Sea, right. So do remember, the Indian Air Force also participated in the pitch black exercises hosted by Australia. And then it also had participation in the red flag hosted by the US in June, both multilateral exercises. So the reason why I'm talking about these is that there can be a probable question where you have got the military exercises on one hand and the countries on the other hand, and then it can ask you to match the correct options, right? So that is it for today. I hope you really enjoyed the session. Thank you so much. All the best.